the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Gen Z females are turning to older men for relationships. We're talking those about under the age of 28 until about 13. Romantic pairings, says the New York Post, with a few decades between birthdays might seem surprising. Now, the trend isn't leaning toward just the sugar daddy norm that can occur for some younger females. According to the New York Post, Bumble, which is one of the top dating apps today, says that more than 3 in 5 Bumble users are reporting they're totally fine with dating outside of their age, outside of their decade even. Now, some people say this is due to social media destigmatization. I think there's a whole lot going on behind this trend. Joining me now is Jim O'Day, the executive director of Integrity Restored. You see a lot, Jim, surrounding relationships, dating, the influence of sexual addiction and pornography. But as I'm looking at this trend, I have really enjoyed looking at the comments as well, because I think this is a very multifaceted area. Now, one of the New York Times Post articles, they blame conservative men in the manosphere for this change in generational dating, with Gen Z wanting to date more so leaning toward boomers. Now, this could show a great trend where we see more Gen Z females are more progressive, while Gen Z males are more conservative. You even saw this in the latest election of President Donald Trump. But you also see trends with date psychology that are reporting that half of men age 18 to 25, so in the thick of that dating Gen Z age range, that half of them have never approached a woman in person for a date. So you have this, okay, boys are stuck in perpetual adolescence and Pokemon and anime, failure to launch, timidity. I also think there are a lot of females who are stuck on dependence, and some who say, hey, I don't want to work, I just want to be taken care of. But then you have the daddy issue girls who are just aren't looking for sugar daddies per se, but to be daddied, to be fathered by men. I'd love to see your thoughts on this conversation right now. I think maybe first most, you think it's just that progressive versus conservative male-female divide in Gen Z?
No, I think that it really is oversimplifying it. And I really have to be careful, because I have a couple friends of mine, divorced guys that I grew up with in New York, who are in this position right now. And it's a real struggle for me to try and be gentle and kind in having conversations with them about these much younger women that they're dating. But I think there's a lot of nuance to this. For the women, I think it's a couple things. I think first, men their age are highly electronic addicted, only knowing how to communicate via text. I was reading an interesting article about colleges having to give kind of remedial classes for their seniors to teach them how to have a phone conversation in case they had to do a phone interview. Like, it would create such anxiety for these kids. So for these young women, you meet this older gentleman who's articulate, who can have a great conversation with you, talk about a number of different topics, seem as if he's very interested, be questioning you and what are you thinking and what's your opinion on this?
Because he has people skills still.
That is correct.
He's of a different generation that knows how to be gentlemanly, to have a conversation.
Yep. And he doesn't want to be isolated. Where, the boys her own age do want to be isolated. They like that. It's by choice. And so I can see where, for that young woman, that feels really good. I also think, it's for sure, it's not just the sugar daddy, right? But there is still a financial benefit, right? When a girl in her 20s is going out with a man in his 50s, I guarantee you when they go to a dinner, they're not splitting the bill. He's paying the bill. When they go to the movies, he's paying. When they go out for drinks, he's paying. If they go on vacation, he's paying. So even if it's not a sugar daddy where he's renting her an apartment or paying for her tuition or whatever, there's still a financial benefit to go out with an older, more established man.
And I do think there is something there. As people try to say it's outright not the sugar daddy element, I see in terms of Gen Z, especially the older Gen Zs who are starting to approach 30, they do not want to work. Whether it's because of burnout, because of the ridiculous schedule in which from little tykes, they were just perpetually pulled around from rigorous education to after school activities to then college, you name it, and they're just done, to the crippling student loan debt. They don't want to work. And so there's part of that laziness and reliance that I do see. And I was fascinated to see some of the comments on social media kind of leaning that direction. They want that dependence on other people. They're very stuck on it. And in one sense, that's natural, I think, to women to be taken care of so that they can take care of children. But this one is more so the laziness and burnout of how fast paced they have been pushed during their upbringing.
Well, and if you, it's been an interesting thing. I saw it. My daughter's now 36. My son is 26, so I saw it much more with him. But we're specializing our kids, even in athletics, really, really young. And so the kid is going to school, then going to pick soccer. Then he goes to soccer practice after school, and then he comes home and he does his homework, and then goes to bed and gets up and does it all over again. That's Monday to Friday, and then Saturday they have tournaments all day, and then Sunday he's seeing his private soccer coach. We have our kids so busy. And I was thinking about when I grew up, I played whatever sport was in season.
Yes.
So in the spring and the summer, we played baseball. In the fall, we played football. In the winter, we played basketball. We didn't specialize. I mean, it wasn't like a career path thing. We did it because it was fun. And I think as parents, we're doing a lot of damage to our kids just making them be so busy. Like, there's a great value for our children to learn how to do nothing. How to just sit down and read a book, or sit down and just think about nothing. I mean, I remember being a kid and in my bedroom, really small bedroom. I grew up in an apartment in New York City. I mean, tiny bedroom. Most places it would be a closet. And I would just lay on my bed, and I had a tennis ball, and I would throw the tennis ball at the wall and catch it in my right hand and then catch it in my left hand and back and forth. But just hours there thinking about all kinds of stuff. Mm-hmm. Our kids don't know how to do that today.
Yeah.
They have to be constantly engaged, constantly entertained. That's not healthy.
Well, and that brings it back to the young females who have to be constantly entertained and engaged. I think a lot of young females, a lot of Gen Z is kind of pushing it back against that. Don't get married, don't have kids. And so I think they're kind of looking around going, well, who could be marriage material? And they're seeing an older generation of men who are available and interested, as you said a moment ago. And they're people who could allow for that lifestyle. And they're kind of being somewhat practical in certain respects in comparison to those boys who are their same age, who have failure to launch and are going to take a decade or longer to kind of get things in order for that to even be a possibility.
Right. I asked one of my buddies' girlfriends. They've been together quite a while. There's a significant age gap, over 25 years. And I asked her one time, I said, what... I don't mean to be rude, but what do you see in him? I mean, I don't get it. and it was a very sincere answer. She said, he's a handsome man, but more importantly, he's emotionally stable. I can rely on him. If he says he's going to pick me up at 7:00, he's there at 6:45. If he says we're doing this, we do this. If he says he makes the dinner plans. It takes the decision making off her. And she really appreciated that. A man who was emotionally stable could make a decision and openly discuss, here's what we're going to do. That was really, enticing to her.
Refreshing. I was intrigued by the New York Post article. At one point, when commenting on this trend of Gen Z women trending toward preferring men a couple decades older than them, one of the comments made was that love isn't just about finding someone your own age. It's about finding someone on your wavelength. I'd love for you to comment on this, because this is a real struggle in the dating sphere today, whether it be that age gap. People want to date often someone their age, but they're not finding people who are on the same wavelength. Can you tie in that age and the wavelength side of navigating, searching for a relationship and someone to marry?
So here's my challenge with that. And it's such a common justification. Well, the boys my age are not on my wavelength. I'm more mature. I'm blah, 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 whatever. Here's the problem. You're still a 21-year-old girl trying to figure out in adulthood, what does that even look like? What does that even mean? And you're with a 55-year-old guy who's got a mortgage, probably kids older than you, and your goals and actually needs are going to be completely mismatched. So what wavelength are we talking about? When one partner, to me, this is just me, but when one partner holds that much more financial power, financial experience, emotional experience, life experience, I think it's very easy for that relationship to turn exploitative. And that's always my concern.
And I was just thinking, we had a peer of ours who was a friend some time ago, maybe more of a mentorship situation, and she married someone who was about 25 years older than her. And we had a lot of friends who went to the wedding, and I just kept questioning, are you really comfortable with this? Have you asked the questions? And I was struck because a closer friend of mine said, I did. Because I said, are you truly, as a solid Catholic, are you truly comfortable going to this wedding? And she said, I had a lot of questions in the beginning. It just seemed really uneasy and odd. I mean, the man's the same age, if not older, than her father. Mm-hmm. And, even her own parents objected to it originally and eventually came around. And the girl's father ended up becoming buddy-buddy with a man. And it struck me that so many people in the end were okay with this relationship moving forward. And so I think at times you have this awkward place where you're wondering, okay, you can see the good elements of a relationship, but is this still fundamentally right?
That's my challenge with it. To me, I really struggle with it because I don't know, but, I was with one of these couples and we were having a very nice evening. And we were all together and we were playing music. And we were playing the music we grew up with. And she got really upset. She didn't know any of the music. There's going to be an automatic disconnect. Life experiences, talking about past presidents. She had no idea who we were talking about. I don't know how you can manage that. Mm-hmm. I get the physical attraction. That's an easy one to understand. What about all the other stuff? That's where I really struggle, Timmerie. I do. I'm sorry. I hope I'm not hurting anybody's feelings, but...
And not that everyone listens to the same music or has the same memory for different interests, but there are certain gaps that are going to occur with time, and it can lead to sensitivity, jealousy, discomfort. Even not to mention the fact that people probably have children or stepchildren of a similar age as those whom they're marrying. It gets complicated. And I think it just points, the big take, and we have just a moment here, Jim, that I've been thinking about is just the necessity of healing through mentorship. If you're in a place where you see women who are struggling with the dating scene, to really, both males and females, through wholesome mentorship that has good boundaries to help navigate the hurt and the searching and the hope. And remembering that ultimately part of this is a faith dimension. I think at that core of young females looking to older men, they're looking for that fatherly role, and that's part of it, not all of it. They're looking for good male friendship. They're looking for values and personability. And this is something we receive through good friendship, through faith, through a deep prayer life. And so I think a lot of that dimension has to be handed down to those of Gen Z who are increasingly leaning toward a trend of over 3 in 5 people on a lot of these dating apps being willing to jump up a couple generations in dating. Jim, thank you so much for joining me today. That's Jim O'Day. He's the Executive Director of Integrity Restored. Great programs on overcoming pornography addiction, understanding even just information on the science and faith dimension of pornography and how it impacts our brains and relationships. Check them out at integrityrestored.org, along with a great new coaching program they have for priests and seminarians as well available. Please check that out. Our 54-day Rosary Novena continues tonight on the Family Rosary across America. We'll be praying especially for our new Pope, Pope Leo XIV, as he begins his historic papacy for our church and our families. Join Father Rocky, Maggie, and tens of thousands of listeners tonight at 7 p.m. Central for the Family Rosary across America on Relevant Radio.
Like what you just heard? Share it with your family and friends. And thanks for listening.